Okay? Where are they going? Right? Where are these companies going to turn for workforce? What are they going to do? The state of Washington estimates that 60% of their agricultural workers they're going to lose that many folks, 6 out of 10 folks. Companies are needing to be more creative with a variety of different challenges. Still, the economy is struggling, but we're seeing with the baby boomers and immigration restrictions, we're going to see, and to borrow from Star Trek, the disability community remains one of, if maybe not the final frontier of our American labor market. Okay? So, as we talk about the oncoming tightening of the regulations for companies that are federal contractors, it's not necessarily that the laws are changing, right? There might be some tighter restrictions coming out in the new regulations, but these regulations have been on the books for many years. It's just they've not been a priority, right, of auditors related to federal contractors, but now they are, right? And companies that receive federal money know that as 2012 and 2013 rolls around, veterans and people with disabilities need to be a priority in our recruiting program. And if an audit happens, one of the first questions, if not the first question of an auditor from the federal government of your company is, show me your affirmative action plan related to veterans and people with disabilities. I have a friend his name is Steve Southwood, in the Indianapolis Department of Labor, OSCCP, right? The Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, the folks that do the audits, right? And he is one of the auditors. And he told me a story how he is a huge disability advocate. He has really changed the way a lot of the companies in Indiana, who are federal contractors, look at not just compliance, but going way beyond compliance and looking at bottom line sense. But he told me the story how when he goes into a company, the first question he asks of the human resource person or the diversity as he's looking at the affirmative action plan is, talk to me about your recruiting of people with disabilities. Show me the section in your affirmative action plan about people with disabilities. And he said 6 months ago, one HR person actually looked at him after that question and ran out of the room. That's probably not going to go well from there, right? But, so people are, more and more, this is becoming a priority. And companies are seeing through the lead of the Walgreens and Office Max and Lowe's how this can work, but they're also now hearing that this has to work, right? And if you have federal dollars, you have to figure out ways that you're going to be more inclusive of people with disabilities in all your affirmative action plans. One of those pieces is we talk about equal opportunity clauses, right? And almost every company out there now, you have an equal opportunity clause in your hiring, as part of your hiring documents. And most companies probably now include disability as part of that equal opportunity clause, right? But for me, where affirmative action planning starts and where compliance starts with the companies I work with is taking a look at that affirmative action plan and asking if you're living it, right? Asking if you as a company actually live that. And that's what the auditors from the Department of Labor are really looking at. It's not just a statement at the bottom of a piece of paper that we value diversity, that we want diverse candidates. It's actually being able to figure out how you live that within your company, how you bring in those differing views. And that's one of the main questions that Steve, again, has taught me is the first thing I do is try and figure out, almost every company I go to has an equal opportunity clause. I try to figure out if they're really living it, right? I try to figure out if it's just a thing at the bottom of a piece of paper or if they're really living that, okay? So, some of the Section 503 of the Rehab Act, what are some of those major responsibilities of federal contractors? If you're a company that has federal dollars, what are those things that you really need to be looking at? And what eventually are the auditors going to be looking at in terms of your affirmative action planning and disabilities? Well, again, in your equal opportunity clauses, including people with disabilities and making sure that you're living that. The invitation to self-identify, okay? That's one of the pieces that the regulations talk about after hire, post-hire. Are you providing a program, an affirmative action program that is informing your candidates, all your candidates that you've just hired, or all the employees that you've just hired, that there is affirmative action programs for a variety of different issues, including people with disabilities, okay? So giving that invitation to a person by letting them know that you value working with people with disabilities, whether they've disclosed or not in the interview, but letting them know post-hire that you have these affirmative action programs in place, and one of those is valuing and related to people with disabilities. Giving that invitation for people to identify. Maybe not right then. Maybe 6 months down the road when they need an accommodation. But creating a culture, as Steve told me, this one is about creating a culture where people with disabilities and disability is valued as a difference, not looked at as a negative, right? And so creating a culture of comfort for people with disabilities. Reviewing your personnel practices, okay? So part of that is looking at, a lot of times I go out to companies and for example, the job description will say must lift 75 pounds, right? And that's one of the bullet points. But then we drill down a little bit more on that bullet point, and we ask, okay, tell me about the circumstances a person must lift 75 pounds. And we go out on the floor, and one of the operators and one of the managers say, well, that was 2 years ago, right? That was 2 years ago because now we do all team lifts and we've changed our procedures, on the floor. But the job description still says must lift 75 pounds, right? That's one example where the Department of Labor is going to say, whoa, right? Because that requirement might be systematically, unintentionally, but systematically preventing a lot of people with disabilities from applying for your job. And maybe that statement is even antiquated. So the Department of Labor is asking you to review your practices and review your job requirements on a regular basis to make sure that the things you're saying in your job description are matching what's actually going on in your processes. Okay? Providing reasonable accommodations. Many companies, most companies, a lot of companies today have what they call the reasonable accommodation policies, right? Somewhere in the books, there's something about how you ask for a reasonable accommodation. Here's what Steve Southwood does from the Department of Labor. He says to a company, to the human resource person, okay, show me your policy on reasonable accommodation. He says most people will show them that policy. Then he opens the door, goes out on the floor, and says to one of the workers on the floor, Chris, can you tell me if you need an accommodation of any sort? Can you tell me the policy or how you would go about requesting that? Right? And if the worker kind of says, huh? Right? Requesting an accommodation, how do I do that? So that is a red flag, right? That the accommodation policy is on the books, but we haven't trained our staff to do that. So thinking about how you are providing accommodations, but how you're also making your workforce aware that that opportunity to request those accommodations is there and that they know how to do that. Okay? Employment practices review. General things they're going to look at how you are looking to promote veterans and people with disabilities, how you are trying to groom leadership, how you are trying to create training opportunities that are universal, right? And trying to get people in from different recruiting groups into those different opportunities within your company. And lastly, job postings, right? One of the things that a lot of the folks in the Department of Labor are looking at is the partners that you're creating. And a big buzzword in OFCCP, as we learned at the Direct Employers Conference with Shannon, is local partnerships, right? That more and more the Department of Labor wants to see that companies are not just reaching out on a national level to maybe one disability organization, but there's true and active collaboration with local schools, local community agencies, local grassroots organizations, but that your locations have true and real partnerships with disability organizations. Okay, so those are just some of the general requirements. How do you get started, right? So this affirmative action stuff, it's coming down, right? It's coming down. How do we get started? And there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways that can get started. We at Turning Point are going to be offering affirmative action consulting to help companies do that. But there's a lot of things to build the partnerships, whether with us or outside with other disability organizations. Looking at some of those basic things, like one of the things I ask companies to focus on is talking about their accommodation policy, as we just said. Do your workers know about that? Have you created a culture where people feel comfortable to identify if they want to and need to identify as a person with a disability? Have you done some type of awareness training, right? Loud and proud, right? That's the word I use a lot, loud and proud. But I think that as I believe, and as many of us believe in the disability world, hiring and aggressively recruiting people with disabilities is not always business as usual, right? But it's a cool business to be in, right? And it will have bottom line impact on your business. But it needs to start. So looking at one of those things, reaching out to a local high school, reaching out to a local partner, all good ways to start in terms of building your affirmative action program. Okay? Some of the things that we are going to do through Turning Point, through our program, but a lot of the things that I think are critical for companies to start thinking about as these regulations are oncoming is doing a good essential functions analysis. Right? How many folks have been a part of an essential functions analysis? I see a few hands going up, right? A job analysis is when we look at the tasks of the job and then we throw them down, right? But an essential functions analysis is when we take those tasks of the job and then we take it one step further and we rate those tasks based on the opinions of supervisors and people doing that job so we can deem them as essential or non-essential. Right? That's one of the things that auditors will look for. So being able to do those job analysis, looking at your job requirements, just starting by taking a look at your job descriptions. Do they reflect what people are actually doing right now on your floor? Technology changes everything in our companies very quickly. Jobs change, jobs adjust based on our production and based on our workflow. We've got to make sure that the descriptions we have match what's actually going on out on the floor. Okay? So doing that, being able to maybe call in one of your partners, do a reasonable accommodation training, do a disability awareness training, do a fear and stigma training, one of my favorite things. One of the things that we've been doing a lot is gathering leaders in a given company to talk about, not necessarily about the politically correct stuff related to the disability community, but the non-politically correct stuff. Right? Starting to talk about fears and stigma within your management team, within your culture, because we all have fears. We all have stigmas, right? I was born without a hand. I've been a person with a disability for a lot of years, my whole life, and more years than I want to admit now, I guess. And I'm a parent of 3 daughters with disabilities, and I've worked in this field since I was 18, yet I still have stigmas about certain disability groups. Okay? I need to talk about those and process those. Everybody on your staff, right, needs to think about and be able to have that door, going beyond political correctness with your team to help them process their fears and stigmas, right? One of the things that I worry about the disability community is we all stay in the politically correct field and we never get to the part of true inclusion, talking about our own fears and stigmas, whether we have a disability, know somebody with a disability, or whatever, okay? And then lastly, another thing that can be done, that we can do, and that other agencies out there, is communicating your job openings. With Direct Employers Association, we're talking about the projects of getting your job openings to infiltrate the disability community. Not just sitting on some job board somewhere, but actually infiltrating to the people who can work those job leads and get you good candidates. Okay? So the benefits of recruiting in the disability community, right? We know all the different things that are potentially out there. Reduced recruiting costs, turnover, tax credits. One of the things that I'm hearing more and more from companies that I've worked with or been a part of is the value of the increased diversity.